Well done. This is like the home stretch. We're like finishing the book tonight. Kari, we missed you for the artist, but I thought of you. um, but this has been, I hope it's been fun. I would love to hear, just for those of you as you've been tracking along, any takeaways for anybody thus far? Where you're like, oh, I think this is what I've got out of it this time.
It's a stronger apologetic book than you think it's going to going in, because so many of the characters that you meet on the bus are all someone that we know who's not a Christian.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Like, I never knew you. And they're like, what? Think of all. Yes.
That's why I don't have a mirror in my house.
Mm-hmm. It's a good way to, yeah, smart. Yeah, somebody else, like a takeaway from this. It can even just be a little thing, but.
Nobody read it.
Yeah. Yeah. Marilyn's like, don't mess with me. I read it. Well done, Marilyn.
I would just say two things. One, so grateful that you did it.
Yeah.
Mostly, as fun as it's been to read the book, I think we could all agree it's been really fun to see Jeff in his lane, teaching us about Lewis. And
like, this is awesome.
Just for me, I'm like geeking out, like you geeking out, which is awesome. But I would say I'm so struck by the dialogue and what Lewis is able to elucidate through the way that he creates these conversations, and it just brings you into it. And so, like what Kurt's point, it's like, oh, we've all been this person or know this person.
Yeah.
And it ends up feeling so personal.
Yeah.
It's just amazing that he does it that way. But I would say in particular, what I love about doing a study like this is I pick up so much in hearing what other people pick up that I might have missed, or the things that you have decided to zoom in on that I'm like, oh, that's so good. I actually blew past that. And so even the way that you've kind of drawn out the characters individually and chapter by chapter, I think is just stuff that I think I would have, that I did blow past the first time I read it, and even reading it on my own helped me slow down, give it more imagery, and give me a deeper and richer understanding of it by doing it in community. So
it's a fun way to do it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, that's cool.
I think just like what came to light for me was just like the deep clutching of like pride. You know,
Yeah.
So hell bent on like being right.
Yes.
And like how much you lose to be right.
Yeah.
In this world.
Wow. Yeah, that's great.
Therapist like about a year ago, and it was like this concept in DBT, and it was talking about like allow others to be wrong. And just allowing others to be wrong is sometimes so hard, right?
Oh,
It's
that's
like,
hard, yeah.
Yeah, just like allow, just so be it. You know, and I think that it's hard. Humility is difficult. And to just say, you know, I don't know the thing. I am wrong. There's someone who knows more than I know, and I don't know why we clutch so desperately onto our limited knowledge of the universe. Who we think we are.
I loved that part in last week where the ghost or the solid person is kind of laughing about being wrong. And like, there's almost a whimsy, like we all have been wrong, right? Like, it's okay. You can let it go. And the person can't, right? You know, like how tight we clutch and how much it costs us.
Well, I'll tell you.
That's right.
I mean, there's so much here, but just that we are the ones that say no. And I mean, it's like that most famous, line, that the gates of hell are locked from the inside. I mean, we saw that all the way through. People saying no.
Yes.
I mean, it's just a refusal.
Yes.
Again and again and again, when love is offered.
Yes.
Like, especially with this last example, right? I mean, with the dwarf and the tragedian, right? Like, and Sarah Smith. Right? And just like that dynamic, you can see how we all are the dwarf and the tragedian.
Yeah.
Like, that's both sides of our humanity. Like, are we going to be the growing dwarf and grow more into being a solid person, or are we going to start becoming a vapor?
Yes.
The tragedian.
And shrinking, but clutching the chain, right? Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Rebecca, please.
And I like your teaching. I appreciate it very much. It's mentally stimulating for me.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's because of my background.
Yeah.
I get enough of that.
Mhm.
So
Yes.
I appreciate you doing that, and I'm just honored to be sitting on here. So really, you don't have to take me to dinner.
Yeah.
Appreciate you so much.
Yeah. to love God with all our minds, right?
And I like the way Lewis constructs and then deconstructs life's journey, and you explore that. You open up that jewel, and so to help us understand the difference and how that journey can be, even in life, even our lives or other people's lives that we know, and you just bring it together.
Yeah, I love that. No, that's right. I was thinking, we were talking today in this group, we're talking about like the kind of Myers-Briggs personality. And they were talking about the intuitive versus the sensing, and how this is like, one is pragmatic, like one wants just like what is, and the other is drawn towards these like big ideas, right? And how these are kind of two very different schools of thought. Is it like, just give me the pragmatics, what works in practice, and then another type that like loves let's just talk theory, right? And I think Lewis is really good at drawing both of those into view, because you go, this is so pragmatic. He's going to talk about, how does hell get into your marriage relationships, into a parental relationship, into work relationships? How does hell get into these things? And yet he's going to talk about a God beyond time. And pull up more chairs. Sorry, I didn't put enough chairs out, but hi, you guys. Great to see you. And like, I think this is what Lewis is so good at, is he takes these like heavenly ideas and makes them so practical. And then he takes these practical ideas and pulls our minds up into this like greater sphere. So I think that's very hard to do. Most people can do one or the other, right? And I think that some of the uniquenesses, and it's just fun. So much good in it. Well, let's jump into it, because we've got quite a bit of complexity in tonight's thing. But this last character that he introduces is Sarah Smith, which I think the name is intentionally vague. This is like nobody. This is nobody in our world. Nobody remembers Sarah Smith, right? And in heaven, she's got this train of like glory and singing and animal, right? So you're like, here is somebody who has lived so well, and yet this is just Sarah Smith, right? The description here, as he says, well, Lewis, I think, thinks it's Mary as she's walking up. He says, is it? And I'm guessing he's going to say, this has got to be the mother of Jesus, right? And it says, not at all. It's someone you'll never have heard of. Her name on earth was Sarah Smith, and she lived at Golden Green. She seems to be, well, a person of particular importance. She's one of the great ones. You've heard that fame in this country and fame on earth are two quite different things. That, for Lewis, is all through his writings, right? Like, he almost like throws it out there, like, you know what? The saints, you don't recognize them, right? Almost as like a challenge, going, who do you think they are? And chances are you're wrong, right? They're like, there's no spotlight on them. There's no publicity meter that's like, pay attention to this person. They've got 20,000 followers on, these people, the great people in heaven, I think, are like so under the radar on earth. I like how, I've told you that I like Krista Tippett. She does all these interviews of people. That's on this podcast called On Being. But she would say it's her goal to find the quiet giants. And what she does is she goes out to like the fringes where people are just actually doing the work. These are not the people that are drawing all the attention. These are the people that are diligently doing the work. And she loves to pull in these quiet giants and interview them, right? Like, because there's no ulterior motive, there's no angle. Their hearts are just focused on the assignment, right? And I think you get the sense with Sarah Smith that she's one of these people who just knows how to love. And I don't think I included any of these quotes about her, but this idea that like everyone was in love with her, but in a way, I like how she says like husbands were so in love with her that they loved their wives better, right? And you're like, whatever that means, right? But you're like something like she loved all these kids, but it made those kids like love their parents more, right? So you're getting at, I mean, what Lewis is probably trying to point out through all of these is a sort of like holy detachment from things, right? Where compassion is not a means to an end. It's just virtue. It's virtue for virtue's sake. It's because it's the right thing to do. It's just there's a purity behind this that is just selfless, right? And as you read that, I think with all of these, you're going, oh gosh, how I can't even imagine loving with that sort of purity. What's interesting about Sarah is, I think on earth, she struggled too. She's going to meet her husband here and she's going to apologize like, I could have loved you better, right? And there's even in there like just a modesty to all of this. This picture, while we spoke, the lady was steadily advancing towards us, but it was not at us she looked. Following the direction of her eyes, I turned and saw an oddly shaped phantom approaching, or rather two phantoms. This is a very interesting one, right? This is like the most peculiar of all these little interactions here. Two phantoms, a great tall ghost, horribly thin and shaky, who seemed to be leading on a chain another ghost, no bigger than an organ grinder's monkey. The taller ghost wore a soft black hat, and he reminded me of something that my memory could not quite recover. Then, when he had come within a few feet of the lady, he sprouted his lean, shaky hand flat on his chest with his fingers wide apart and exclaimed in a hollow voice, "At last." All at once I realized that it was what it was that had put me in mind of. He was like a seedy actor of the old school.
When it's spoken on the as it's read,
Yeah.
at last, in a real dramatic way.
Oh, yeah.
And it's acting it out.
Oh my gosh. Well, we get this picture of just this deep sort of splintered soul, right? Where you go, it's just broken into two. And, this reality that he realizes, he assumes the taller of the two is the actual person. And then realizes, no, it's the little person that's the husband, right? We're going to see his name is Frank Smith, right? Frank Smith, and then the tragedian, this tall sort of puppet of a man, which we're going to get to know his voice a little bit. And I think really see, in some ways, this sort of inner conflict that is going on probably within all of us. The inner deception, the way that we speak to ourselves. But he talks about this idea of her compassion. And I thought this to me was so beautiful. He says, it's like when you throw a stone into a pool, the concentric waves spread out further and further. Who knows where it will end? Redeemed humanity is still young. It's hardly come to its full strength. But already there's joy enough in the little finger of a great saint, such as yonder lady, to awaken all the dead things of the universe into life. And this to me is just Lewis letting his imagination go, right? I can't help but think of The Widow's Mite, right? And this story is one of my favorites, but I love this idea of this woman giving very little and that's overshadowed by somebody else pouring all this money in and everybody's attention drawn to the wrong thing. And everybody's like, oh my gosh, did you see that? And Jesus is like, yes, did you see that? Right? And you go, oh, it's this little thing where he's like, oh my gosh, right? So you're like, it's not like none of these things matter. It's like that little thing was huge to him. And then the things that draw our attention, the noisy, loud things that clamor, Jesus like almost couldn't be bothered, right? Like, whatever, all your noise, like give Caesar his little coins, like who cares, right? But the widow's mite, he's going, the effect of that. So here, what you see is like, we have no idea the effect that these sort of concentric circles can have, that small acts have this kind of eternal ramifications to this, right? Where you're going, the concentric circles are moving out over small little acts of great love. And I thought, just even that, thinking about pragmatics, thinking about how we live our days, like realizing there's more going on than we realize, right? Anyway, interesting thought. I'll keep moving it, but if anybody's got a point where you're like, can we say something there?
I just have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's like, thinking pragmatically, I'm just wondering if that could be like our effect, on someone that we witness to.
Yeah.
Like the concentric circles, and that somehow, because of our love, they're sort of like hanging on a string, like in heaven. Like not to say, oh well, I'm in heaven and you're not. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
I'm just picturing it like that, because
Yeah.
it seems like the only reason why they're even there is because of her great love, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is the concentric wave going outward like that, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, it's not anything that they're doing. It's somehow that her love is speaking into Frank, which is growing the dwarf, trying to grow the dwarf, or the reverse, if the tragedian, is doing what he's doing and rejecting, and then the dwarf is shrinking, right? Frank's shrinking.
Yeah.
But I'm just wondering about that. Like, could that be something like like our touch with certain people that, I don't know, and then somehow, not like they're the dwarf and the tragedian, but I'm just thinking, and somehow they're not in hell but in heaven because they're somehow attached to our love. I guess that's a wistful thought.
Sure. Yes.
Thinking of family, just people.
Yeah.
Members, I guess.
Yeah. Right?
I love that, Michelle. That's a beautiful idea. I love that. And I also like the idea, like, maybe that's why we're told to pray for our lost loved ones, so that tie will be so tight to us, right? So that our devotion kind of draws them in. I love that. That's beautiful. I hadn't thought of that.
That would be lovely. That's what I thought.
Mhm.
Concentric waves, like maybe it would touch and bring them in.
Are you saying because of our love?
Well, God's love through us.
Yeah,
of
love,
course.
God's love through us is affecting. You said,
And so, yeah.
is
Who
that
knows
what you
where
meant?
it will end? It's
Mhm.
like, who knows where it will end? And I'm thinking of the concentric waves of love. Right?
Totally.
That's what I was thinking of, like the love of Sarah Smith. And she somehow got these guys, they should be in, hell, right? Like they're
Yeah.
like goblins.
Yeah.
But they're hanging on to her because she's speaking life and love.
It's awesome.
right? And
Yes.
somehow, I don't know.
It's great. No, I think that, and how it is all so interrelated from these little things. And this maybe isn't exactly what you're saying, but we're like these concentric waves. I think of like if my dad is telling his testimony, he's going to talk about this neighbor that drove him to church. And this older man, and he even he tells the story and he goes, because the man had like lost an arm. So it's like part of it. He's like this character already in my mind. He could drive with one hand. My dad tells this story about like being so impressed that he could drive with one hand and he would drive him to church. Right? And I think I'm probably a Christian because of that guy. right? Because you're like, because my dad's going to lead me to Christ, but his relationship started from that neighbor that was like, oh, I'll drive you to church. So you're like, how big of a deal is it to drive somebody to church? Well, maybe it's a really big deal, right? Because then maybe everybody who my dad touched, but then who their lives touched, right? So you're like, oh gosh, if we can get above this and see from a heavenly vantage point, you're like, maybe small little acts of love like that have changed the world, right? Changed eternity, which is, so this compassion, right, is going, we have trouble measuring the effect. But like such an important reminder. Okay. So we see this side here that I was thinking, the tragedian is deeply broken, right? And I was thinking, it took me to this idea of like playing the victim. And I don't know if you guys do this. I do. Like, I've got a victim voice in my head that comforts myself with the fact that like nobody gets me. And if I'm honest, can go to this place of like being hurt, hoping for pity.
For what?
Pity. And it's interesting. Like, I think in some ways, like Lewis would say, oh, Jeff, do you see your tendency to choose pity over joy? And I would go, oh, I've done that plenty in my life. Where I'm like, I'll settle for somebody's pity because that feels like some weird form of affection, right? Or they'll feel bad about how sad I feel. So I'll take comfort in that. Yeah, right? For some broken reason. Yeah.
Because we're afraid we fear, we fear rejection.
Yeah.
And we fear being cast out of the crowd.
Yeah.
So we are always looking for the thing that's going to keep us safe.
Yeah.
And so we don't want to go on a limb for fear of losing the crowd, but then you end up taking this partial half love instead of like.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's like there's some measure of control that we're still able to cling to there or something like that. Right.
Or we're setting ourselves up for when it doesn't work out to say, well, I knew it was going to happen this way
I
anyway.
don't want to be foolish. I'd rather not be loved than be.
Yeah. I won't get fooled. Yeah. Nobody's going to reject me again. So we've all been broken. I mean, that's right. We've all had our hearts broken. And so there probably is a coping mechanism there, some sort of, this has worked for us at some point.
It seems like it comes from a scarcity. I mean, I can relate to that.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like that's where I go to, like to this. But I think it comes sort of from a scarcity mentality that if I go follow that back, it's to the desire not to be disappointed because I have been drop kicked or something.
Yeah.
Or different things in life or whatever, and not wanting to be. So it's like this downward, like what you said, like this spiral, like of why it's just better to say, yeah, everything just.
Yeah.
Whatever,
Yes. So that self-protection is like part of our redemption is letting that compassion come in, right? And to receive it there. This line, she apologizes saying, I didn't love you perfectly, right? And the tragedy finds an opportunity in this to like, poor me, right? And he says, you mean you did not love me truly in the old days? And she says, only in a poor sort of way. I've asked you to forgive me. There was a little real love in it. But what we called love down there was mostly the craving to be loved. In the main, I loved you for my own sake because I needed you. And now, said the tragedian with a hackneyed gesture of despair, now you need me no more. But of course not, said the lady. And her smile made me wonder how the phantoms would refrain from crying out with joy, right? I mean, she just, beauty. What needs could I have, she said. Now that I have all, I am full now, not empty, I am in love himself, not lonely, strong, not weak. You shall be the same. Come and see. We have no need for one another now. We can begin to love truly. Isn't that good? Right? And you're like, oh gosh, what would that be like?
Do you think that Lewis thought that altruism or any sort of truly non-self-centered emotion was possible? Maybe only through like God's redeeming work?
Yeah, and it's a great question. I think it's in The Weight of Glory. There's a place where he says, there's like a split second where our pride is pure. And it's like a child before a father, where we can receive that praise and hold it with pure intent, right? Like a flash, and then we go off and running with whatever that glory is and turn it into something about ourselves, right? So like the danger of glory for us is that we take and twist it, right? And hold on.
Let's take love for instance. So like, do you think that Lewis would say that it's possible to actually truly love another person, or is it all just an expression of your own needs? Mother love would be an example.
Right.
The older I get and the more mothers I know,
Yeah.
the more I realize that their connection with the kids is completely about them fulfilling their needs. And it looks like, it looks like self-giving, but it's the opposite. In so many cases, to such a degree, I'm not going to say I know every mother in every mother's heart, but I'm getting more and more open to the idea that altruism can exist.
Maybe, yeah. Well, I think what I'm saying, this is not a perfect analogy, but maybe it's like a broken clock is right twice a day, right? That maybe like all of us are so imperfect, and yet there's like flashes where it's pure, moments where it's pure, right? Where you go, that heart of ours is made for that, and yet the thing in us is that it wants to take and twist all, even the pure moments we do something bad with, right? But I think there are moments that occur that are selfless. And then we like reflect on them and we think, oh, that was pretty good, right? So I think it's hard for us to stay there long. And that's just a guess, but I would say, I think Lewis is going to fight pretty hard for the greatness of the human heart, that it is something profound, right? And that in heaven, we're getting just a flash of that, right? As we see these solid creatures coming in and they're full of glory. They're just a reflection of God, and yet they're magnificent, right? And I think Lewis goes, like he would say, if we could all see ourselves right now, how we truly are, our tendency would be to worship ourselves or worship each other, right? So like, in some ways, our glory is so veiled in this light to keep us humble, right? So I guess in that way, I don't think he wants to diminish and just say everything's broken as much as we're just not functioning how we're made to function. Anyway, we can keep talking more, but we'll keep going.
When you open the door for somebody, you're not looking for anything other than just the love that you have for another human being. It may be just an instant,
Yeah.
but there's no reward there except our own opening our hearts. And I was kind of surprised at your, and I don't mean this in any, you sounded as if you were cynical about love. Are you?
No,
No, okay.
no. So I have this is a larger conversation. I come from more of a Reformed theology where the idea that if sin were blue, everything we do is blue all over. Like how we live, how we think, how we act, and how we interrelate. And so I'm a big fan of Tim Keller, and one of his things is about how all of our virtue is basically motivated by fear and pride. Like, I don't lie because I'm not one of those liars, or I'm afraid someone's gonna find out, right? But those are the reasons why we lie. So it sets up this self-defeating, that's basically how I see motivation outside of redeemed Christianity, right? So when you open the door for someone, you could be doing that because that's custom. You could be motivated by that desire to seem like another person. You could have been having those thoughts for 50 years when you first started doing it. They become habit now. So no, I would not even say that something as simple as opening the door for someone is selfless.
Well, I just absolutely, totally disagree with you.
Okay.
And I-
Hey, welcome. Okay, Gilbert, you guys can arm wrestle later if that's
No,
okay.
it's an important issue because we have to realize that some of our motivation is selfless.
Okay, to be continued.
You want me to shut up?
Yep.
don't you?
Yes. I love you though.
I know.
So let's get to Frank and the tragedy, because I think this is interesting. I think there's some good stuff for us here in this idea of pity. Maybe it's just me. Maybe as I read this, I go, all right, this is sort of the game that I play. No, dang it, sorry. It's off of a Kindle, so.
There's different publication titles.
Right, that's true. Yeah. I'm sorry. Well, I'll tell you what, Kay, you want to know what's funny is, so I was copying from my Kindle and it cites it, which is nice. I just reached my copy and paste limit. Has that ever happened to you? You can only copy so many and then it's like, sorry, you're done. I'm like,
You did have them before, that's why
so now I'm like pulling up a PDF that I'm copying over here because Kindle won't let me. I'm like, oh gosh, they think I'm just ripping off anyway, so. True story. It turns out you can only copy so much text from a Kindle book, and then they're like, you're busted. Okay, so here we go. I do not know that I ever saw anything more terrible than the struggle of that dwarf ghost against joy. Okay, that I put in as just a standalone line because I was thinking that to me categorizes so much of what we're talking about here. But the struggle against joy, I thought is just such a great way of saying, like, here's what's going on when you sin. Like, look at how hard you will fight against joy. And I think in all my self-pity, I'm miserable and I'll choose it out of like some sick desire to feel right, right? I'll take that over being joyful. And you're like, what a loss, right? But to go, how easy it is for us to do. So he says, using pity, other people's pity in the wrong way. We've all done it a bit on earth, you know. Pity was meant to be a spur that drives joy to help misery. But it can be used the wrong way around. It can be used for a kind of blackmailing. Those who choose misery can hold joy up to ransom by pity. You see, I know now. Even as a child you did it. Instead of saying you were sorry, you went and sulked in the attic because you knew that sooner or later one of your sisters would say, I can't bear to think of him sitting up there all alone crying. You used your pity to blackmail them, and they gave in the end. So I think this is important for two reasons. I think it's important because it exposes a sort of game that if we're not careful, we find ourselves doing this, right? The idea of blackmailing other people with our sorrow, right? I thought that's just a great way of describing that. What's up, Jeff? So to know that, to expose that, I think is helpful. But for Lewis, he's going to get at a deeper point about heaven and hell that we'll see as he goes further, which is this idea, how could there be joy in heaven if there's people that are miserable in hell, right? And he's going to talk about that. How could you be happy at a party where people are suffering? And at some point he's going, well, number one, the suffering is self-inflicted, and that this sort of leverage at some point is gone. It's lost its ability to control, right? So these are the people that are in hell, are the ones that have they're using it to some end. But what you see in heaven is like a sort of freedom from that possessiveness, that controlling, that manipulation.
Hey, Jeff,
Yeah.
is there a difference here between pity and compassion?
Yeah. Well,
Because I know that word gets interchanged.
yes.
Even in Scripture, it gets interchanged
Yes.
in translations.
Yes.
Like in the Good Samaritan, some translations will say, and he had pity on him.
Yeah.
The Good Samaritan. And others will say compassion.
Yes.
I just wonder if,
That's a great point.
if how he's using it is.
Well, I think this idea, he's using it in kind of the lowest form as like feeling sorry for somebody. Because I think you're right, that in some ways that pity could almost be mercy, right? And so that like there's but here's the truth is that pity is in this case, it's a good virtue. That this person through sulking is trying to like manipulate that pity. He's trying to like blackmail them into feeling sorry for him, if that makes sense. So it's a twisted form that he's trying. So I think like here he's saying he would go sulk in the attic so that his sisters would feel bad. And you go, oh, the pity of the sisters, they're feeling bad for their sad brother. But it turns out he's just manipulating them. So the sin is on his side, not theirs, if that makes sense. Right? So their pity there is a form of compassion in some ways. Is that?
Yeah, no, I'm just
Yeah, it's interesting.
Because, well, in that sense, that's, so I'm just going to use Good Samaritan.
Yeah, perfect.
It would be like, the priest is coming up and he gets close to the person who's in need, who's obviously injured and everything, and that person somehow tries to manipulate that situation to create pity to try to get that person to do something. Okay, so that's the person in need is trying to manipulate.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Where in the Good Samaritan parable, the issue is that the sequence is he came near him, he then sees this person in need, genuinely in need, and has compassion, pity, which results in action to help that person.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not about what the other person's doing to try and manipulate him.
Right.
It's a compassion to say, that turns into an action to help.
Yeah.
Which would make it frustrating that if I'm in heaven and I have compassion of those in hell, I can't do a darn thing about it. Right? I mean, there you go.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect. Well, and I think so much of this is, it's complex. So tell me if this makes sense. And I think this is kind of a little bit like going along with what you're saying. If somebody comes into the office and they're in need, okay, this is going to sound a little cynical. But most people that just walk in off the streets and come ask for something, I'm pretty sure they're giving me a story. Because you start hearing it over and over and over. This is the story, right? I got robbed here, right? And now all I need is a bus ticket to, right? And so is this genuine? I've like stopped asking that. And I just go, God, what do you want me to do here? And sometimes God's been like, no. Sometimes God's been like, yes, help this person. And they may be manipulating, right? But you're going, the question of compassion, I don't think it has to be perfect. I think you can show pity on somebody and be taken advantage of and it still be a virtue. If that makes sense, right? And in some ways, like better to err on that side. I think at some point what Lewis is saying is that whole thing's over. That whole game, at some point, he's going to say, remember going all the way back to the beginning, Lewis says this book is written as a response to Blake's Marriage of Heaven and Hell, right? And Blake says, good and evil, is all like sort of swirling around together, right? What is good? What is bad? It's just sort of one big conglomerate of what is. And Lewis says, no, that good and evil are not married in this way, that heaven and hell are not married, they're divorced. So they're oil and water. And eventually, in the end, these things are so separate that they cannot coexist, right? So in some ways, what you're seeing, especially in this last chapter, is these things moving further and further apart, right? And for Lewis, he's going to go, the hell is shrinking and heaven is enlarging, right? So this is skipping ahead, but remember he goes, like you couldn't fit the apple in hell because the apple in heaven is bigger than hell, right? It's like it wouldn't fit because you came up through this little crack in the ground, right? So you're like, you thought you were traveling this great distance, but what was happening is that bus was enlarging so that it came into heaven and all of a sudden was like heaven-sized, right? But you're like, but hell is not just down there in the crack, but it's even getting smaller. It's receding. So this sort of coming apart of these things. And that's where you see at some point, everybody's starting to fade away or disappear, right? As they're arguing back, as they're choosing sin, they're vanishing, or some are going back on the bus, some are disappearing. This little guy's going to shrink till he's no more, right? Poor Frank. Anyway, pity, yes. What's that?
There's something about giving him that name is humorous.
Right? Frank and Sarah. Such a sweet little couple. So I brought this out because I thought and again, maybe it's because this chapter resonates with me. I've mentioned this to a few of you guys, but I read this book called Positive Intelligence. It's from this guy at Stanford, and he identifies what he calls saboteurs. And for him, he identifies voices of judgment that are in our head, right? And so he's going to go, what are your saboteurs? Well, take a test. So one of mine is victim. And so here's the description. He says, the victim wants you to feel emotional and temperamental as a way of gaining attention and affection. It results in an extreme focus on eternal feelings, particularly painful ones, can often result in a martyr streak. The consequences are that you waste your mental and emotional energy, and others feel frustrated, helpless, or guilty that they can never make you happy for long. The victim's lie is that assuming the victim or martyr persona is the best way to attract caring and attention for yourself. What I liked about these examples in the book is that he says these are bad friends that you've held on to. And it's inside of you, right? It's this voice that just goes, yep, don't you know it, Jeff? Sure enough, here you are all by yourself again, right? Whatever this is, this voice that comes in that we're like, oh, thank you. Yeah, just tell me. Like, tell me how sorry you are for me, right? And exposing these lies, right? You just realize whatever that is. One of my other ones is hyper analytical. Like, I can sit here and figure this whole thing out. Like, don't disrupt me. I'm going to solve this. I'm going to play the chess game over and over until I solve this one, right? And this is the point of it, is he's going, gosh, when you catch yourself doing it, you're like, oh, no. I'm not listening to that. How silly that is, right? But until you're aware that you're doing it, you just fall into these patterns of self-talk, patterns of judgment, ways of talking to yourself. And anyway, as I'm looking at the tragedy in this small little Frank, and the conversation between them, right? The tragedy is trying to comfort Frank and to tell him, like, it's not your fault, it's her fault. She never loved us, right? And to just go, oh my gosh, do we see ourselves doing this? Do we hear ourselves doing this? Do we catch ourselves doing this? The sooner we do, we're able to just be like, oh, no, thank you, right? But until we do, we're clutching on to that chain, just like he is, choosing this thing. Any thoughts on that? I'm curious to know.
We have to be extraordinarily mindful of where our thoughts are going.
Yeah.
And I've always avoided journaling, but I think maybe it's
It's great, Gil.
very important.
Yeah.
Because when I was 6, my mother had to give me away, and it has affected my whole life.
Yes.
And in every situation, I say, well, of course, this was going to happen.
Yes.
And, oh, yeah. And I think that was what made my marriage, because I expected it.
Yes.
So I think we have to just be really, really aware of what the holes we're talking ourselves into, the
Yes.
rabbit hole.
Yes. Yes. That's right. That's right. And this is what Lewis wants us to understand, right? Is to go, it's not just affecting today. It's affecting the whole trajectory of your life, right? That like when you get stuck in this rut, right? This is a sort of trajectory that goes towards eternity. It's the Annie Dillard, how you spend your days, how you spend your life, right? And so to go, all these little moments throughout the day really do matter, because ultimately in the end, like we're going to see, heaven and earth are just not that distinct, right? When these things get caught up into eternity, you're like, Lewis is going to say, we're already there. We're already in eternity, right? That all of this is being transformed either towards heaven or towards hell in how we live and orient our lives today. It's such an interesting idea, isn't it? Yeah. It's all right. You can have one more. Just kidding.
It's just that this is so, it's really powerful, especially the last quote, like the first quote of 13, when it just says, about the struggle against joy and the victim. I mean, it's just like, I can just think, I just thought like moodiness, and even if somebody that you live with, did something like you think they deserve the silent treatment, and
right.
It's like, I'm thinking that is hell.
Yes.
Like that is just everything that was just described, because I said it starts with something that might be righteous, a genuine, like maybe it is wrong, whatever that person did, but then I decide I'm gonna stand on this like misery, and you're gonna be miserable too. And like until, I don't know, you do something, because I'm a victim, and so you just better shape up, or I mean, I'm not saying that this is how I am, but I'm just saying like it's so miserable.
Yeah.
And I can just see it, like the moodiness, and like I just have a choice, to choose joy, and like to choose heaven. The kingdom of heaven is at hand, like right now. Whether you did whatever that crazy thing you did or not, whatever, that I don't have to get dragged down with it. Like and then maybe, I mean, it just doesn't. I mean, it's just, I see it all the time. Like if it just becomes miserable if you're the victim, if I'm the victim. But if I actually am not even affected, or I'm thinking like loving, it just dissipates. It's just like the end. It's like growing the dwarf. I don't mean that in it. Like aiming at anybody in particular, but I mean it's like love. Like love, starting seeds. I think marriage is a great chapter.
I think there was a New York Times article recently where it was talking about like the number one killer of marriages right now is the silent treatment. Is that interesting? And it was like, don't do this one thing, right? Was kind of the article that came out, and you're like, what's the one thing? You're like, oh, the silent treatment. Don't do this, right? And you're like, oh my gosh, right? But you're like, what is the silent treatment? It's just this. It's holding on to an offense, right? But you go, like, what does it cost you? Well, it just costs you joy. And, so I've seen that. Yeah, go ahead,
It
Jeff.
just makes me think, in dovetailing off that, like, so playing the victim, I think, then perpetuates resentment. And it just, this story keeps coming up for me, so I figured I'd share, but it just brings me back to Cain and Abel. where
Sure, yeah.
like, and so God shows favor for Abel, which doesn't feel fair. And so Cain's naturally feeling like a victim and is resentful. But God says, gives him an out. He says, if you do what is right, will you not be accepted?
Yeah.
And Cain goes, okay, I'm just going to kill my brother instead. Like he's given the out. He's given the opportunity to choose
Wow.
to overcome his resentment. But he stays in the resentment and kills his brother. And we know what happens from there. And just like that played out in the 3rd chapter of Scripture is just so interesting.
Yeah.
I like.
It's
looking
great,
at
Trev.
That book that you were talking about. I like looking at these as just different ploys from the enemy, because I hate when people talk about like my inner dialogue or my self-talk is so toxic or all this stuff. Because I think, at the end of the day, it's really just like the enemy just sitting on your shoulder 24/7, accusing you. Hang on to that. Don't talk to him.
Yes.
Just pay. You're a victim. No one understands you. Like, it's just a lie, right? So I love the idea of like,
Totally.
so you don't have to forfeit or betray yourself. You can actually just be rebellious to the enemy and stand on truth and just like say, no, I'm going to choose joy, because like that's the better choice, right?
So good. That's right. That's right.
I'm a little rebellious, so I like, God appeals to me.
No, but I think that's right. You go, what is spiritual warfare? Well, and I think in some ways you go, it's the combination of these things. There's a vulnerability for whatever reason, and then there's an accuser that just goes right at it. Just like, ding, 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 ding. And we're like, that's my spot. So Frank disappears. Where is Frank, she said, and who are you, sir? I never knew you. Perhaps you'd better leave me, or stay if you prefer. If it would help you, and if it were possible, I would go down with you into hell, but you cannot bring hell into me. You do not love me, said the tragedian in a thin, bat-like voice, and he was now very difficult to see. I cannot love a lie, said the lady. I cannot love the thing which is not. I am in love, and out of it I will not go. There was no answer. The tragedian had vanished. The lady was alone in that woodland place. And a brown bird went hopping past her, bending with its light feet the grasses I could not bend. I love that picture. Like the bird is pushing the grass down and he can't. Lewis can't even bend the grass with his feet, but this little bird's hopping along, bending the grass. To me, there's something that I really feel like Thomas Merton taught that was so helpful to me is he has this idea of our true and false self. In those categories for him, like the true self is who we really are. It's who God sees when he looks at us, right? It's the child who we were, who we always will be, kind of in some ways. The false self is this self that we create, right? And I always think it's never been easier. Technology has made it so easy to create a false self, right? It's an online persona, right? It's like our best angle. It's like our edited photos. It's this image of my life that I want to create. And Merton will say, God doesn't love that person, right? And it's not that God is not loving. It's that that person doesn't exist. It's not real, right? It's like we've created this imaginary person, and God's like, I don't know that person, right? In some ways, when you think of like the sheep and the goats, and Jesus is saying to these religious leaders, I don't know you guys, right? They've like constructed this whole reality that God's like, I'm sorry, I don't even, who are you? So she's saying, who are you, to the tragedy? She knows this little tiny Frank, but this other guy, right? The one that's been like sort of speaking for him. She has no idea. I had some questions off of these chapters, and this is kind of, there's more for us to tackle here. All the deep theology is still to come. But I thought I just threw some questions up for thought. You know, the two ghosts, kind of our divided selves. I said, in what ways do you experience a divided self like the tall ghost and the dwarf? Can you identify moments when one part of you seems to reach toward healing while another part clings to grievance, control, or self-pity? And it's just an interesting dynamic within us, right? That if you felt like that wrestling within yourself, right? When you have this part of you is like drawn towards this bigger reality, and the other part sort of clings. I don't know. Anybody have a thought on that?
Yeah, I was thinking about, I don't know if it was the previous chapter or 2 chapters before with the lizard.
Yeah.
That seemed like a parallel
Yeah.
for at least when I was listening to this, because it seems like, I mean, different things, right? Like one's mostly about representing lust, right?
Yes. Yes.
And this is like this facade, this like fake, puppet of a man,
But very similar. You're right.
but very similar in a way.
Yeah.
And, like the lizard is much smaller, right, and sits on the shoulder, but is the one calling the shots.
Yeah.
And then this man, this facade, is the one who's kind of filling in and being what, playing this role that the dwarf needs to have filled. And both of them, for me, highlighted just this idea of like the attachment we have to either the lizard or this fake person that we've constructed to do the thing that maybe, and it's trying to get at some kind of good for us, but it's not healthy and it's never enough.
Yeah.
And we don't want it to die, because if it dies, then we think we might die.
Right.
Safety is gone.
Right.
And I was rooting for, I haven't read this book in a while, but I was rooting for the dwarf when he's like about to let go of the chain, and I was like, yes, just like a
You can
little
do
bit
it.
more.
Yeah.
Like he kind of lets it go, and then like it's like, no, I have to keep this thing. And that's really juxtaposed with the other guy who, I don't know, I think is noble, but in some ways is like, yeah, just rip off the Band-Aid. I can't even watch. Like, he doesn't quite want to let go of it. He's just like, yeah, kill it. And it is just, such a struggle to let go of those attachments to the things we think will do good things for us. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, right? Because that moment, he's saved in like almost that quick, spontaneous moment where he has a window of clarity and he chooses right.
Yeah.
Right? Versus the other in that moment isn't able to let go. And you're like, I think sometimes it can feel that way. Like repentance is like, do it right now, right? It's this like, you've got a moment where you can choose. You see why some of the urgency, I think when you look at scripture and it's going like, today's the day.
This contains all moments.
This contains all moments. That's good. The second question, with the chain, what emotional chains do you still hold on to that keep you in the role of victim? What do you fear might happen if you were to release that chain? What identity or story would you lose? And that kind of follows just right along, right? But that almost the idea of the control, this not wanting to let something go, right? And like, even when deep down we really want to, there's this part of us that's like, I don't know if I can. How sin has that kind of tangle.
I'm the only person that on every slide, we're talking about the victim, thinks to myself, we are living in a society and at a time that is completely captive by this.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And not to pick on pathetic people, but when you meet one of these people, we're all to a degree this, but someone who's completely captive by this, and you explain to them why they're not a victim persuasively, what's the caricature answer? They say, you've invalidated my existence.
Right. Yeah.
You've taken from them their identity because that's all they have.
Yeah.
So I just thought it was interesting that whatever medicine we're supposed to get from this, we need to mass produce it and just get it out.
That's what I was thinking. Why don't they make movies like this?
Yeah.
They make religious movies, but it's always not this.
Yeah. It's a little bit. Yeah. I know. This will be a good one, right? What were you going to say, Michelle?
I just said, let's do it.
All right. They made a play of this, but it's kind of wacky. It was cool, but it's just a little out there. I mean, but yeah. No, I think you're exactly right, Brad. The theatrics of the victim, this kind of goes along with your at last. The tall ghost dramatizes his pain. Have you ever caught yourself performing your suffering to elicit sympathy or control outcomes? How might you distinguish authentic emotional honesty from subtle manipulation? Yeah, this one was written. I know a guy who struggles with this. But it's an interesting one. Like, kind of to that point, and this kind of is what you're talking about too, Greg, like authentic emotional honesty from subtle manipulation. How do you distinguish those? And sometimes that's what I was kind of getting at is sometimes it can be really hard, and sometimes you just respond to the best of your ability. But does anybody have a thought on how you can, like, the texture, even if it's like maybe just for yourself, distinguishing your authentic honesty from your subtle manipulation?
Intention,
Yeah.
knowing your intention. You can appear to be so wonderful, and yet your intention is selfish.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what you and I were talking about before, it's clear.
I love where Paul says, like, hold every thought captive. Right? You know, and you get like, he's like, interrogate yourself in some ways, right? And you're like, I mean, you can carry that to the extreme, right? And create some sort of neurotic behavior. But you're like, it's not a bad idea to ask yourself from time to time, what am I up to here? What am I really hoping to gain from this, right?
It's important to reflect, right? Like, what's
Yeah.
the motivation? And I feel like the authentic emotional honesty to me would be like, that's costly. Like that costs you something.
Yeah.
That makes you step out of that.
Interesting. Yeah.
Whereas like the subtle manipulation, there's always like it's a game, and I mean, even if it's a little bit prideful, like you're hanging on.
Yeah.
I think that, I don't know, like I know, you know, there's been moments where people are like, gosh, you like went after that person still after they did that, like just like a friendship or whatever, and I'm like, it doesn't cost me anything.
Yeah.
It doesn't cost me. Where I know for other people, it's like, oh, that would cost me, like greatly. And
Yeah.
that's just, I'm just saying like that's something where I've noticed a difference, whereas I mean, I'm back in other areas, but it doesn't hurt my feelings if people don't want to be my friend. Like that doesn't crush me, but I know that, like, I don't know, I just know that I feel like that's the difference. It's like something that costs you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really good.
We're in the men's group of like the 2 Corinthians.
Awesome,
We
yeah.
try to have a theme
Yeah.
to drive us through whatever book we're doing. And the theme I'm using in 2 Corinthians is this verse that comes at the very end. It goes on to what you're talking about. Because Paul says, so I read this every week to the men.
Awesome, Greg.
What we're trying to do as we go through 2 Corinthians. Examine yourselves to see whether you are in the faith. Test yourselves. Or do you not realize this about yourself, that Jesus Christ is in you? So there you go. Examine yourself. Test yourself. Look. Do exactly what you're talking about.
It's awesome. Yeah.
Be self-reflective.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't just buy your own press. We're so good at spinning these things. It's great.
It seems like I know I'm going over my
Shh.
but
I'm just teasing.
It's just I was thinking like authentic emotional honesty. It's like when you actually experience the authentic pain or the authentic experience, and like if you're angry or you're sad or whatever that emotion is, but then that line is when I think it's no longer the focus on this is my experience and this is what I'm feeling and checking in with myself, and you know, but now I want something from you. I want something from the other person.
Mm.
And then the focus shifts.
Mm-hmm.
It's like now it's like a festering. It's like, okay, I'm in this pain and ouch, it hurt. But then after a while, it's like, no, I now want you to pay for it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or something like I want.
Right,
It's
right.
like it's festering where it. I don't know. It's like the focus shifts to longing for something in the other person to change or something.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what I'm thinking of.
It's great. Yes.
Where it's not just I own this. This is what I'm experiencing. But now it's like, how can I get this person to act in this certain way because they have to pay for whatever I'm feeling.
So good.
Like fill in my gaps, is that what you fill this in? Like I have this vaping thing, and it's your
Yeah,
job to
well,
fill
I just
inside
mean
it?
like when I'm really good at this. Like,
Ask me anything. You're like, this is my wheelhouse.
this space between just authentic emotional honesty and when it turns into this, like the festering and the ruminating and the, when it becomes like this, now it's like, you better do something about it, you know, or it's just where it's not just ouch and I gotta go to the mountain and have some space by myself or whatever and take care of. I'm just seeing it the way that I would see it, but, you know, and then there's that moment when it's like, you have to take care of me. I guess.
It's, what's occurring to me, I think, we're talking about this because it's Frank and Sarah. We're talking about this in like a marriage, right? But if it's not between a husband and wife, let's say, nobody can tell me this more clearly than Patty. If I'm like, am I doing this for emotional honesty or subtle manipulation? She would be like, manipulation. Or no, that's honest, right? She'd see it a mile away. And it would probably have everything to do with sort of the energy around it for me. And unforgiveness. If there's somebody I'm holding a grudge, I can talk you through all the reasons why I'm not. And she'll go, there's like an energy here that like you haven't let go of something. I'm like, stop. Right? Like, oh yeah, well you, right? And she just is like, and so it does make me think too. It is like, it's a question of everything, but in some ways you're like, oh, find somebody that you can trust that can speak to this. Because often those people that really do love us and know us well are able to go like, oh, this is small Jeff right here, right? Like, this is not you. This is not when you're free. This is you when you're held down, and to go, in some ways, it's a way that we can sort of lovingly look out for each other as well, right? To welcome in that's so valuable to have that kind of input into our lives. And usually it's the last thing we want to ask for. Let me just, I've got some more, I'll put these slides up so you guys can download them if you want. But
Question of the group, 'cause
yeah.
I don't know if it's just me that I missed it, but like, is Frank is the person that's diminished? Is the tragedy in that his ego?
Well, I think it's kind of this like false self, or it could be this voice of judgment, or it's whatever that is, right? I think it's this other side of his personality, right? That's trying to convince him that like, this isn't your fault, it's her fault. She doesn't understand us. She doesn't love us. So there's this brokenness within him. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's a form of ego. You probably would know better than most.
Well, I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like, has he just been breathing air into this blow-up doll for so many years that it's like, that's who he, like, it's like a,
It's like a warped sort of image of himself. Yeah, yeah.
Everyone look at me. It's been a tragedy my whole life.
Yes.
Well, and that reminds me of the like Grumble and the Grumbler.
Yeah.
It's like at one point do you just become the thing
Yes.
yourself, and it's like you can no longer distinguish
That's great.
that kernel of a person versus this.
It's like that I am my pain now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Through this little Thomas Merton quote up here, he says, every one of us is shadowed by an illusory person, a false self. This is the man that I want myself to be, but who cannot exist because God does not know anything about him. And to be unknown of God is altogether too much privacy. It's a great line. My false and private self is the one who wants to exist outside the reach of God's will and God's love. We're not very good at recognizing illusions, least of all the ones we cherish about ourselves. A life devoted to the cult of this shadow is what is called a life of sin. So I think that's kind of how I would answer that, is this like sort of false self, this false persona, but I don't know if that's exactly right. But
The man I want myself to be could mean the man I aspire to be. That's not what this is. The man that I want myself to be is the victim illusion.
yeah, right. And I mean, I remember this one person saying, what I really desire is to be adored, not loved. And he would say, adoration is to be loved by people that I don't have to love in return. And whether or not that's technically accurate, it's a really interesting idea, right? That you go, what does our culture want? We want adoration. We want to be loved by people that we don't have to love in return. And maybe to monetize that somehow, right? You're like, that's success. That is like, that's what we all want, right? And you go, that whatever it is that we're creating that is adored is probably that thing. So maybe it is ego in a way, right? But it's detached. And it's something that we want to believe desperately about ourselves. We want to think that's who I am, right? The exposure to it is the fact that we're so insecure. We're never, if we become that false self, we're never at rest. That's so vulnerable, right? Because we know it's a fraud deep down. So you're always like one failure away from losing everything, right? Because
the tragedy is such an ugly part of him, though. Like, I feel like the tragedy would have been some wonderful thing that he popped himself into be if it was like a false self. Like, I feel like it's like the grossest,
That's my point.
ugliest part of him. That's like.
So when it says that the man I want myself to be, the dwarf wanted to be the tragedian, is that what Thomas? Okay, just making sure I got that straight.
yes. And I think the point would be, whatever that thing is that you're aspiring to be, you're like, it's unfair to pick on her, but you're like, if I could only be Kim Kardashian or something like that. And you would go like, Kim Kardashian in heaven. I mean, right? You would be like, wait, but this is a thing that everybody's aspiring to be. And if you saw it in a setting of true beauty, I don't mean to pick on her, right? But you're like, whatever the image is that we've created of success, in some ways when it's seen in heaven is just sort of exposed for how superficial it is. Anyway, not to pick on Kim.
I'm telling Kim.
Don't, please. Okay, so we don't have time for this, but I was going to go a little bit on, this idea, how can, and we already talked about this a bit, how can there be joy in heaven and suffering in hell simultaneously, right? I was going to back up into this guy, David Bentley Hart, is this theologian who I think is very wise, but he really disagrees with Lewis on this point. He's one that just goes, you can't, that at some point, in order for them to be rejoicing in heaven, hell has to be empty. But I think for Lewis, I think he's pushing back against that. And I think one of the ways that he does that is in sort of the reason why people would choose hell. I think that's one of the things that's very important for him. And also like where God is limited in being able to just coerce somebody into heaven, right? That he's going, if the very nature of God is love, then love is never coercive. So at some point, it honors the choice, right? And so in the end, these things ultimately separate, but part of it is it's just shrinking, it's losing, sin is losing its control, it's losing its leverage. So this is George MacDonald's answer. He says, what some people say on earth is that the final loss of one soul gives the lie to all the joy of those who are saved. And George MacDonald says, that sounds very merciful, but see what lurks behind it. The demand of the loveless and the self-imprisoned, that they should be allowed to blackmail the universe, that till they consent to be happy on their own terms, no one else shall taste joy, that theirs should be the final power, that hell should be able to veto heaven. Right? It's just a great line. And he's going, sorry, in the end, like hell, you don't have the ability to hold heaven in check. Right? At some point in that, they just will have to admit defeat, right, of their own choosing. And that is a heartbreaking thing. Again and again, we see the solid people saying, if there's a glimmer of hope, we'll go after it, right? So even there, as this little Frank is shrinking away, she's desperately trying to save him with love. And she can't follow him down, but MacDonald's going to say, Jesus did. Right? That peace, that peculiar passage in the Apostles' Creed that Jesus descends into hell, right? And you're going, what is that all about, right? And it's kind of a mysterious piece, except it's right there at the core of the earliest teachings, this idea, but like how Jesus' compassion extends that far, right? That she can't follow him down into hell, but Jesus could. So anyway, I think that's Lewis's, the reassurance there of the lengths to which Jesus will go. In fact, I read this the other day and I thought this is so interesting. It was this idea that, did I say this to you already about Adam choosing to eat the apple? That there's a moment where Eve became mortal and Adam was immortal. And this one theologian was saying, might Adam have chosen mortality out of his love for Eve? That he bites that apple to become like her. And this person was saying, we don't really, I mean, that's kind of reading into the scripture, but isn't it interesting that this is what Jesus did, right? Jesus comes and takes a bite of that apple and becomes sin, right? And you're like, it's just a powerful image, becomes mortal, becomes human, right? Like the extent of his humility, as Paul would describe it. You know, like, it's a powerful picture of God's love, the descent, right? How far he would descend. So anyway, okay, continuing. We've got like 5 more minutes. I loved this, the smallness of hell. I think this is just part of Lewis's brilliance. You know, do you mean that hell, all that infinite empty town, is down in some little crack like this? Yes. All hell is smaller than one pebble of your earthly world, but it is smaller than one atom of this. All hell is smaller than one pebble of your earthly world, but it is smaller than one atom of this world, the real world. Look at yon butterfly. If it swallowed all hell, hell would not be enough to do it any harm, to have any taste. It seems big enough when you're in it, sir. I just love this. He's like, I was there. It's actually pretty big, right? Anyway. This idea of the smallness, you know, he says that yet all loneliness, angers, hatreds, envies, and itchings that it contains, if rolled into one single experience and put into the scale against the least moment of the joy that is felt by the least in heaven, would have no weight that could be registered at all. Bad cannot succeed, even in being bad, as truly as good is good. If all hell's miseries together entered the conscientiousness of yon wee yellow bird on the bow there, they would be swallowed up without a trace, as if one drop of ink had been dropped into that great ocean to which your terrestrial Pacific itself is only a molecule.
What offers me about that is in the scale against the least moment of joy, so going back to the importance of joy.
Yeah, yeah. It is so good. And I mean, in how the enormity that we see these things versus the scale at which God is seeing these things and from his perspective. And we were talking about this earlier. Lewis wrote this science fiction trilogy, and the first one is called Out of a Silent Planet. And, you know, we look at this and go, gosh, if Satan is the ruler of this world, like, God has given him the enormity of this planet, right? He's going, if you actually look from out in space, he's given him this tiny little planet here. It just so happens that it has on it the thing maybe closest to God's heart. But the devil's realm is small. It's just Earth, right? It's like in this corner of this Milky Way galaxy in the midst of this vast creation, this tiny little plot, but how from our perspective, we're like, the Earth is massive, you know, and we see it as like the enormity of the evil. And in some ways it's like, no, it's just right here. And yet the way we feel it and experience it is massive. But so this playing at this idea of perspective for Lewis is really important. And he's going to get into this last chapter in this idea of a God that's eternal and beyond time. And that ends up being how Lewis kind of makes sense out of all of this. He's talking about universalism, predestination, free will. And Lewis is going to say a lot of these terms, the reason that we find conflict with these ideas is because we just don't understand what a God's eye view is of the world, that we all see from our sort of limited perspective. So he says, for a damned soul is nearly nothing. It is shrunk, shut up in itself. Good beats upon the damned incessantly as sound waves beat upon the ears of the deaf, but they cannot receive it. Their fists are clenched, their teeth are clenched, their eyes shut fast. First they will not, in the end they cannot open their hands for gifts, or their mouths for food, or their eyes to see. That no one can ever reach them. Only the greatest of all can make himself small enough to enter hell, for the higher a thing is, the lower it can descend. We've talked about this. A man can sympathize with a horse, but a horse cannot sympathize with a rat, only one who has descended into hell. And will he ever do so again? It was not once long ago that he did it. Time does not work that way when once you have left earth. All moments that have been or shall be were or are present in the moment of his descending. There is no spirit in prison to whom he did not preach. This is this idea, again, of like what it must be like to be God. And here, this is kind of his explanation. You can see it only through the lens of time, in a little clear picture through the inverted telescope. I tried to get ChatGPT to draw a picture of this, and it couldn't. It could not draw an inverted telescope. I asked it like 10 different times, and it just couldn't. It like always drew it the wrong way. This idea of like how we see, we're looking through the big and small. So when we try to come up with concepts like predestination, right? Like God knows everything. And you're like, so if God knows everything, how does man have a choice? And he's going to say, well, you're talking about what it's like to be in time versus outside of time. So Lewis would say that like, if you picture like outside of time is like a piece of paper and inside of time is like a line on that piece of paper. And that line is our life. And we are like moving consecutively across that line. But God is in every moment as if it's the present. Which is an interesting idea, right? The closest thing I could get to in scripture where you kind of see this is I love where Peter says to Jesus, I'll never betray you. And Jesus' response is almost like, I'm watching you betray me right now. Like it's actually literally happening right now, Peter. When I say you're going to betray me, what I mean is you just did, or you are actually right now. Right? So to go, what it would be like to have a God's eye view versus a human perspective. So Jesus is sort of there within time, moving along, and yet has this background sense of like everything at once. What's so interesting if you study physics is they're going to say time, our perception of time is really a perception. And the truth is that the universe happens all at once. Just poof, and we don't experience that way. But it's already happened. It's like happened. All moments have happened, right? And physics is like, this is just the way it is, right? But you're like, that's not how I experience it. And you're like, yeah, well, that's like an interpretive element of what it's like to be human, right? But the reality is this, like, so it's interesting when you go, you're trying to picture God as like somehow beyond all of this, but you're like, it's actually with our science, we go, oh, it is the truth. And yet there's us. And why would God create that? Well, I think what the lengths God has gone to create this sense of freedom within us, and that these two things can coexist, and it's a mystery. That's where I'd push back a little on the Reformed guys, right? That I think it can go too far to one extreme.
Spent an hour arguing with those guys about how God existing outside of time solves all these problems. So we're completely outside.
Keller would be with us too. Yeah. So every attempt to see the shape of eternity except through the lens of time destroys your knowledge of freedom, is what Lewis is going to say. Witness the doctrine of predestination, which shows truly enough that eternal reality is not waiting for a future in which to be real, but at the price of removing freedom, which is the deeper truth of the two. And wouldn't universalism do the same? You cannot know eternal reality by a definition. Time itself and all acts and events that fill time are the definition, and it must be lived. And so you just go on, are we free? Clearly. Like, we live our days making choice after choice and being able to choose this or to choose that, right? And yet you go, the sovereignty of God remains true simultaneously, right? And somehow both of these things at once. And that's, I talked about this on Sunday, how Chesterton says, like, these paradoxes are everywhere in Scripture, but they're everywhere in science. They're everywhere. But he says Christianity gets over it by like just holding these opposites and holding them furiously, right? To just go, it is somehow both of these things. And, you know, the truth is, again, we bump into these mysteries even in our understanding of physics, right? Certainly we're going to do that in theology. And like we were talking about too, like, wouldn't you be worried if we didn't get to the edge of our conceptual ability and find that it's bigger than what we can imagine, right? You're like, because otherwise what sort of God is that? You're like, that's a God that maybe I'd be suspicious. Did we make that up, right? But when you come to something like the Trinity, you're like, I don't really understand that. I can tell you, I can give you the definition for, you know, and you could pass your theology test with the definition of the Trinity that I gave you, but it doesn't help you conceive of it, right? There's no conceptual model for these things. But welcome to string theory. Welcome to whatever it is, right? You're going multiple dimensions of reality and these kind of things. And like physics is talking about those things. And if you're like, give me a picture of it, they're like, we can't. It's too complex. It's like beyond our brains. But it's fun to think about at least, right? I think it started with creation.
But it just seems like time would be created so that we have choices. And
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know.
Did God exist before creation? Was there if there was no time? Yeah. No, I mean, I think we're talking about things there. I mean, I think it's a good question, but I think in some ways the answers don't make sense. What was it like before time? In some ways, you're like, that doesn't make sense. A question itself doesn't make sense when you say before time.
It just seems like it was made for us, maybe. I mean, because so that we could stop and see choice and make a choice.
Yeah.
Like.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yes.
I mean, like make a choice this way or that way.
A world where God has given man the ability to choose for the sake of love. You're like, I kind of think that was the idea in this vast universe. And the fact that may only happen on this tiny little planet of ours, right? And you're like, I mean, why? Why does God put us on this little remote little rock in the vastness of all this? And I think,
And then love us.
and then love us. But I think in some ways you're like, God, you're like, you think of what we measure like value based on who has like the most time and who has the most possession or something like that. And God puts us in a universe where he's like, see how much I have of all of this? Like this is not what I care about. It's beautiful, right? But it's vast to blow our minds, but goes, the thing that matters most is this little heart that's like mine, right? A heart that can choose and a heart that loves beauty and a heart that can create. And God's like, that's like a heart like mine, which is just on our tiny little planet here, zooming through the cosmos. Anyway, I know that stuff gets pretty heady, but it's worth going back and revisiting some of that stuff. I think Lewis talking about time, it's a healthy one if somebody's really struggling with like, how do you make sense of this? I mean, it's why I think part of me just loves physics because I think it's interesting. But part of me likes to talk about it because people will look at faith and think this is so mysterious. And I love to say, so is science. Science is so mysterious, right? And so to go, why is faith so full of paradox, and you're like, why is physics so full of paradox? That light is a particle and a wave and it cannot be, right? That's like impossible. And you're like, let there be light. Like, we live in a world where it is reality, even though it cannot exist, right? These kind of things, right, make it to me like so much is mysterious. We live in something that is meant to just stir our hearts with wonder and awe and keep us humble. And then also remind us of like, we have a place in all that. We're being invited into all that. And this idea of living in eternity, living into heaven right now. So, living in time, becoming eternal. These questions, I said, how do your daily choices shape not only your life now, but who you're becoming for eternity? This to me is like, this is why I thought it would be so interesting to go through this during Lent, right? Because Lent, you're like, again, I say this every time, but Lent is not about giving up sin, right? That's year round. You always have to give up sin. Sorry, guys. Lent is about laying aside something that might, in some ways, be a good thing, has become something that you're too dependent on. And what are you practicing by that? Well, you're really practicing freedom, right? To say, this thing is not the master of me. This thing doesn't have a hold on me. Where I might otherwise cling to this comfort, I'm letting this go. To just say, my heart matters more and the freedom matters more. And so it's looking at something like that, like fasting, and going, why do we do this? For the sake of eternity, for the sake of who we're becoming. This transformation that God is doing in us, that our hearts become more and more and more compassionate, like this woman, Sarah Smith, at the end, right? Which doesn't require you to be any big deal. It just means that you're just lovingly obedient, selflessly living out your life, caring for her as she is for these little kids or people around her. So I don't know. We're over time. I apologize for that. I'm feeling a little self-conscious about that, but
to talking about physics.
it's what happens,
In the universe, you forget that time exists.
right? Turns out we are all still in time.
The rest of us are.
Yeah. I was transcending. All of a sudden I felt I was a little bit like 1 foot in, 1 foot out, but now I'm back. Anyway, thank you guys for doing this. It's been so fun. And thanks for hanging in there through all this and even through some hard parts in this book. We will do this again soon, I promise. But I'm just grateful. It's fun to, hopefully for all of us, to just kind of wrestle a little bit and play with these ideas. And like we said, like love God with our mind. I think God loves that stuff. So anyway, let me pray. We'll pull it to a close. Sound good? Jesus, we're so grateful for the time that we've had together to use our imaginations. God, I thank you for what a gift that is, that you've given us that ability to kind of dream a little bit and to think of things that feel just a little beyond ourselves. And yet, God, thank you for the way that stirs our heart. God, that creates in us a sense of awe. And we thank you that that your ways are so much bigger than our ways. And God, thank you for just the way that you've entrusted each of us with this heart. And pray, God, that we will live in that place of humility and surrender. God, that we will choose to love others instead of loving ourselves, or at least loving others as we love ourselves, and loving our neighbors as ourselves, and showing compassion to those in need. And so, God, I pray that that would become just who we are, that as we practice those things, that our hearts will be formed into loving like you love. And God, thank you for the way that you love us. Thank you that that empowers us to love others. God, that you loved us first. So just so grateful. Thank you for Easter. Thank you for what we celebrate in the days ahead. And bless each one as they go from here. God, let us live each and every day more and more into the fullness of your joy in heaven. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.